Hey everyone, it's Jesse Collins here, your host of Power Up Digital Games Conference. Today I am actually bringing with us a legend in the gaming industry. He's been in the industry a very, very long time. His name is Rusel DeMaria. He is the he was involved with Prima Games. He has written so many strategy guides and so many books over the years. If there's anyone that knows the games industry back and front, it's this gentleman. Russell.
Hi, Russell, actually.
Russell.
Although it's easy to pronounce it different ways. I had a lot of flamenco friends who used to call me Rusel, so I'm used to that. Jesse wanted me to talk a little bit about my history, I guess, and then open it up to questions. I started out, I got lucky. I lived in the area of Stanford University, and I happened to ride my bike to the, or maybe drive my car. I can't remember. It was 1967, and I was driving by then. But I went over to the student union, and I saw this weird box sitting in the front of in the middle of one of the rooms, and in the student union, and it was something I'd never seen before. I didn't know. It wasn't a pinball machine and didn't know what it was. So my friend Steven and I went up and we played around with it. There was nobody around. And it was a video game called Space War. And it was revelation. It really was cool. I was really excited about it. But there wasn't anything else like it. And so we went on and had our summer and did our things and came back, I don't know, maybe a couple months later, a month and a half. And we went to go look at it again. We said, let's check that thing out again. And when we came in, there were like at least 20 people deep around it. You couldn't even get close to it. And up on the wall, they had piped a screen image of it. They'd taken a monitor up so you could see the game being played, but couldn't get near it anymore. So we didn't even bother to play it again. But it was really an amazing thing. And I thought to myself at the time, this is really remarkable. I wonder what it is. A few years later, Pong came out, the Odyssey came out, and I started realizing that, oh, this is something that actually I'm going to be able to play with. And so throughout the 70s, I bought every console system that I could imagine getting, except for Vectrex. For some reason, I just could never pull the trigger on Vectrex, but I had everything else. And I played fairly incessantly, and I enjoyed games, and I was just a hobbyist. I was still playing flamenco guitar more avidly and working on a house that I was helping build. But then something happened, and in 1980, 81, I bought my first Apple II. I hadn't had a real computer up until that point. And of course, I discovered games on the Apple II. We discovered how to hack games. So I played lots and lots of hacked games because that was the way to get them. And I lived on Maui in Hawaii by that time. And it was pretty difficult to actually buy games because there weren't anybody selling them. So anyway, along came this quarterly periodical that had on the front and said, if you want to write for us, just let us know. So I called them up, and they said, yeah, we'll give you free software if you write reviews for us. And I said, that's a good deal. Who needs to get paid? I get free software. And said, okay, well, we'll give you something as a trial. And then after that, you come and see what's available, and we'll tell you what we've got. So they gave me a funeral director's package written in DBase, if anybody remembers DBase. And that was what I had to review. And I don't know, I had done some writing before. And so I thought, well, I can have fun with this. And I wrote a fairly amusing review of this product, but it also was serious. I really thought about, well, would this help you if you had a mortuary? And they liked what I did, so they gave me more. And for about the next year, I wrote about 50 of those for these people for free software, some of them games. At one point, my wife came in and said, I just read in the paper that you could get paid for what you're doing. And I said, oh, really? Okay, let's see how that goes. So that was the start of my writing career in games, but it wasn't really in games at first because there was almost nowhere you could write about games. I was a little too late for Soft Talk, which was a great magazine at the time. But by the time I started writing, it was a little too late for me to get in there. So I wrote a lot of stuff that was based on productivity stuff. I wrote lots and lots of reviews and analysis of and comparative analysis of things. I worked for the Leading Edge company for a year and a half doing comparative analysis for them and learning a lot about how to examine games or how to examine productivity very, very well. And that was cool. But then I finally got to write about games a little bit. I wrote for A Plus magazine about once a month. I'd do one or two reviews. And but I wrote a lot for other magazines like PC Week and Byte Magazine and others that were not game magazines. I started a column in the Maui News where I lived, and I wrote about computers generally, but games too. I wrote a column in Nikkei Byte magazine in Japan for 6 years. And then it was like in 1989, and I really wanted to write about games, but there just wasn't anybody to write for. Not to disparage them, because Johnny Wilson's a friend of mine, but I did write once for Computer Gaming World, and their style was very third person, and I write second person, much more active. I didn't like the style, and they didn't pay well, so I didn't want to write for them again. At any rate, this awful magazine called Computer Play started up as a national magazine. It was started by the son of a mobster in Chicago, and he was kind of a weirdo, but it was a national magazine on games. So I jumped in and wrote lots of reviews for it. And eventually the guy's son absconded with the money that his father had given him, embezzled it and disappeared. So his father hired me as the executive editor, and I had to do everything. I had to do the layout. I had to sell the advertising. I had to be the editor, and I had to write most of it because they hadn't paid most of their writers. I was one of the few that actually got paid. So that lasted a little while. We got one volume of it out. My layout skills were pretty deficient, so it really looked like shit. But I learned, and later on, I've done a lot of layout work. But anyway, so out of that came GamePro and PC Week. And GamePro, PC Week was moved by IDG into the GamePro offices, and GamePro asked me to come and be the senior editor for PC Week. I was still living in Hawaii, and I had to spend like 5 weeks in the Bay Area and 5 weeks back home. And that was a difficult situation, but I managed to revamp the whole magazine with the help of the art department. We took it from a really boring magazine to a really interesting one. And I lasted for 6 months there before we mutually decided that it was just too difficult for me to be away for 5 weeks. And I agreed, even though I really liked the job and they really liked the job I was doing. So anyway, that's kind of how it all started. And since then, while I was at PC Week GamePro, I also started working with Prima Publishing. They came to me, my agent, my book agent. I had written some books by then. He came to me and said that this guy was looking for somebody to start a strategy guide division. Strategy guides were pretty new then, but he had seen a couple and thought it was a good business. So we met with him, and I became the 7th employee of this company, Prima Publishing. And I was the head of the division that I named Secrets of the Games. We did a bunch of books. That lasted with me for 6 years. It grew to, I think, 150 people over those years, from 7, all on the strength of the strategy guides. I sold a lot. I made some money. And I was purely on royalties. I did not get a salary, even though I was creative director. But that was okay, because I actually did okay on royalties because they paid well at the time. That has changed a lot since that was the case. So since then, I've written some more books. My most recent one is High Score Expanded, which is a expanded version of the game history book I wrote uh, more than 10 years ago originally. It's been expanded and redone from scratch. Um, and it's available on Amazon now as a Kindle book. It's not print right now. It's very, very expensive to print because it's got like more than 3,000 images in it and 450 oversized pages. So I'm having trouble finding somebody who will print it now, but I'm working on that. Anyway, that's kind of the brief history. I've done some other books. I've got an interest in the positive potential of games to be something good in people's lives and not only entertainment, although I think they always should be entertaining if they're going to be any good. I always think fun is first. I did write a book with David Perry on game design, and I did a lot of study on that. I've been involved in game design as well, and I'm currently the narrative designer for an upcoming game called Starfighter Inc. I think that brings it up to stay up to current. So I'm ready for questions.
All right, so we got a question. Is a very simple one, but a very important one. The most major lesson that you took from your job's experience, what is it?
The most major lesson, well, for me personally, it's to be authentic, to be honest, to work hard and do what you are passionate about, um, but also to be always open-minded. In terms of game design, I think that game designers should be as open-minded as possible to know much more than just games, to know about history, to know about geography, to know about psychology, very important psychology. But I don't know if there's one single major lesson. It's just to do what you love and do it the best you can, which sounds fairly trite. Sorry about that.
Oh no. So I actually have a question while Stolt is typing. My question. You've written a lot of books. Just looking you up on Amazon itself, I see 70 results with your name on it. Um, Tell us a little bit about your experience and how many games do you really have to play to be able to write 70 books on it?
Well, I've lost count of that. The honest truth is, I don't think it is 70 books. I think some of those are false. There are a few of them that either I didn't write or never came out, but it is more than 60. So I guess it's close enough. Um, I had to play a lot of games, but to be honest with you, I'm not the world's greatest game player. And so for many of the strategy guides, I did have other people working with me who were really good, who helped me find the strategies. We sometimes recorded what they did, and then we would write the strategies out of that and take pictures out of that in the early days. So it was a collaborative effort, but I played a shit ton of games. I mean, what can I say? I've been playing games pretty much ever since the early 70s. I don't play as many as I used to. I admit that. I'm older. Uh, I'm busy with other things in my life, and so I can't keep up. And also, I used to get them all for free as a journalist, and I don't get them free anymore, so I don't play them as much. And also, one other thing is that they're big. Most games today are huge, and they take a lot of effort and time and skill, and I just don't have the energy and time to do all of that. So I play very selectively now.
Absolutely. Another question that I would have actually here, there's Stoll actually sent his question. What did you think of the recent Star Wars lore shakeup? You were involved with a lot of Star Wars books, so that's relevant.
Um, I've read about it, but I've stayed out of it. I think this is my honest opinion about today's state of things today. There's an automatic outrage response. We become very easily outraged, and we become very angry about things that aren't very important. Um, I don't have a dog in this race. I don't have an opinion that's real strong about it. I think that Star Wars is a um, It's a franchise. It's a franchise I happen to like, and at the same time, I think a lot of it's been pretty silly. I loved the first books a lot more, or first games and movies a lot more than I did the later ones. Um, so I don't really have a strong opinion. Yeah, I see that from Zarko. Um,
Yeah,
you
he says that
or
he
Zarok.
disagrees with you.
Yeah,
He,
you're right. There are a lot of great games that aren't huge, and I do try to look at indie games as much as I can because I really love the indie movement and respect people who can do it without the major money and without being part of the major studios. This is where games came from, was independent developers creating things that were new and interesting. And I find some of that stuff is really interesting. But, I have played Journey. I have played some of the others. And I probably should have mentioned that. But in comparison to the way I played games before, I don't play nearly as many.
all right. S. Vito says, do you find the same pleasure today in playing games that you found in playing way before, back when you were really involved?
I do. When I play, I really enjoy it. Games are one of my favorite kinds of entertainment, but I have to say I just play fewer of them, and I'm selective. If I don't like a game right off, I probably won't play it very long. I mean, I'll give it a chance, but there are certain games with certain mechanics or certain types of games that I don't really find are my type. And I only say that because, you know, everybody likes different kinds of games. I'm 67 years old, coming on 68. I don't have the twitch reflexes that I used to. Playing a first person shooter isn't as much fun for me as it used to be. I like games where I have a little more time to think. I can play at my leisure. I can come and go as I want, which is why I don't play massive multiplayer games as much anymore, because then I would get sucked into the social part of it and I couldn't leave, and I have to be able to be free. So, yes, I do find pleasure in it. And I kind of wish in a way that I could play more than I do now, but I also have different interests in my life. Um, and I have books to write and games to help design. So those take precedence over just playing.
All right, so I have a question here. Your book, High Score Expanded, you have been writing this for 10 years and you keep revising it. Do you find that every time you revise it, are you adding an absolute bunch, or is it just a minor changes?
Well, the reason that I had to do High Score Expanded is because the first and second editions of High Score were placed out of print, and they've been out of print for years. And I know that a lot of people wanted it back. I did a Kickstarter to do the next edition, High Score 3. I've not been able to do that. And the reason for that is that I tried to work with the companies and indies and other people, and I found that I had lost some relevance in the industry, and I wasn't getting any cooperation. Plus, a lot of the people that I used to know well are gone, and so I thought I'd better do something to get myself back in the fray. And so I brought back High Score. I gave a free copy to everybody who backed my Kickstarter, um, or at least I offered it to them, and many of them have taken me up on it. Uh, I'm also writing a book about Microsoft and its history with games. And I've interviewed 89 people for that and been working on that for a few years. It's a big book. It's huge. It's a lot of work. I want to finish that and get that out there. And then my next goal is to do High Score 3.
Awesome.
And
Okay,
yes,
so
High Score Expanded has about 40 pages of new content.
ah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. S. Vito also asked, what is the one guide that took you the longest to write?
Well, that's a really hard question because I don't remember. We used to churn them out pretty fast. I'm a good writer and I'm a fast writer. I did my X-wing book, strategy guide in 1 month, and I laid it out and designed it and wrote it in 1 month. That was probably one of the faster ones. But as far as what took me the longest, I know what the long one is, but it's kind of a weird reason. My first PC strategy book was based on Larry Holland's 3 World War II flight simulators, and Battle Britain and Swaddle, Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe in 1942. And so I was asked by Lucas to write a strategy guide for those, and I started out on it, but it turned out that Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe was late by a year and a half. And so I worked on that book for a year and a half. And in the course of doing so, I actually heavily researched aviation in World War II and wrote a history of World War II aviation along with the strategy guide that I'm very proud of. In fact, Lucas had done a pretty good manual, as they used to in those days, and their consultant was a colonel in the Air Force, Pentagon consultant, pretty heavy-duty guy. And I asked him to look at it after I wrote it, and he said, "This is excellent." He made no corrections. He even said, "You must have read my book about the Luftwaffe that I wrote," and I hadn't. And I said, "No, I never read it." And he said, "Well, it's amazing because you came to the same conclusions and understandings that I did." So I was very proud of that. But that took a year and a half, and sold about 7,000 copies. So there you go.
That's awesome. Okay, so Zarok asked a question, but I'm going to expand on that question a little bit. What do you think about games from Poland, or in the case of the question, or any European games? Do you know any, like interactive games?
Sure. What's not to like? They're really good games. I love the original Witcher a lot. I love Witcher 3 too, but I haven't been able to make it through all of it. But Witcher 1 kicked my ass. It was so funny. I loved the humor in it, and humor is not easy to find in games. And the original Witcher just had me in stitches sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I'm an equal opportunity game player. Any games from anywhere are fine with me if they're good.
Let's see. What's the next question? Here we go. Michael Valiant writes, "Do you find that because of your job with a critical, detailed eye in writing guides can ruin your enjoyment of a game faster than a casual gamer?"
I don't know. I don't think so. I play games with a critical eye, and I used to review them a lot. But I play them to see what's fun. I play them to enjoy them. If I don't enjoy it, then it's a different thing. I did have to do a strategy guide on Boogerman once. We sort of agreed to do that, and it was kind of painful to do that. But Secret of Mana was one I did completely on my own, and I must have played through the game at least 4 times. And I loved it every moment because I love Secret of Mana. That was a lot of fun, even though I was writing the guide. So I play games for fun, and I don't let being a professional stop me from having that fun, because I think it's really important to have your emotional connection with it if you're going to critique it, or if you're going to do a guide. I also disagreed with people who would start a review by saying, "I don't really like this kind of game, but," because I think that's utter bullshit. If you don't like that kind of game, don't review it. I happen to like all kinds of games well enough to review them. I just don't play all the same kinds anymore as I used to.
Awesome. So I remember I met you originally at the Game Developers Conference. Personally, it was 2009, and we met because I think we had the same hotel.
Very possible.
We were waiting for like the cab or the way to get to the convention hall. And so nowadays, like 6 years later from even that, do you still go to gaming events and conferences and conventions and talk at all?
I haven't in a while. Partly it's monetary. I just can't afford to go. I have to pay my way, and I can't afford it. I used to go on a press pass, but because the press has expanded exponentially, people are getting really, really picky about it, and they don't seem to want to support book writers anymore. I can still get in if I really want to, but it's just too much of a hassle. So I haven't gone for a few years, but I went to every GDC from about 1987, I think, or 88 until 3 years ago. So, I've just stopped, and I went to all the E3s and, PAX and other things when I can. I love going to shows. I really do, but it is expensive, and I don't have the money right now. I'm unemployed writing books.
S. Vito asks, what is the most fun part of writing the books that you have written?
I think that's an easy question to answer for me personally. The most fun I've had is writing fiction, turning a strategy guide into something that's a story. I did it in the X-Wing and TIE Fighter books, which I really love what I wrote. There are other people who seem to have liked it too. I picked up what David Westman and David um, um, Maxwell had done as level designers, and I turned it into a real story. I gave it characters, I gave it context, drama, all of that within a structure that they had created. Was just a series of missions that kind of connected together. I really enjoyed that, and I had written a novella for Lucas on contract called the Farlander Papers. That was how I started what I wrote. I kind of created the characters at the beginning there, and then expanded it into the strategy guide. I did the same thing with the Seventh Guest and the 11th Hour strategy guides, the Mist strategy guide. I basically let another guy who was a good writer do it, but I told him how I wanted it to be. So yeah, that was the most fun is because I love fiction, and I did study with a great writer, Theodore Sturgeon. And so fiction is something I'm very passionate about and really enjoy. And I actually got to do that in some of my strategy guides.
Awesome. So you mentioned that you were narrative lead on your current project. Is there anything you can tell us about that? Maybe your experience with the project itself?
Sure. Starfighter Inc. is basically a hard science-based multiplayer space combat simulator. I came in about a little more than a year ago, and they had already been working on it. They were about 2 or 3 days away from starting a Kickstarter to fund it, and I was kind of too late because I couldn't really stop them at the time. I thought it was a mistake, and it turned out to be a mistake. They weren't quite ready, but I really liked the project, and I knew some of the people. David Westman from the X-Wing experience was there as the lead designer, and Jack Mames is a very experienced guy. And so I asked if I could help, and they said, sure, we could use that. And as it turned out, their current lead writer was basically leaving to do other things anyway. So I took over the writing and narrative side of it, but I also did a lot of design work. And I've done some work I'm really excited about. The game is kind of a small team, 15 by 15 game set in a futuristic world in the solar system, based on, as best we can, real science. And my contribution to it is to be a very, very deep narrative underpinning to it. I've worked with another guy who's really good on creating many groups, corporations, and characters behind the scenes that are going to be the reason why all these battles get fought. And we're going to incorporate that in what I would say are subtle but meaningful ways into what we're doing. And so unlike a lot of World of Tanks type games that don't really have a deep narrative about it, we're going to have a very deep science fiction futuristic narrative with a lot of what I would call psychological interest. Anyway, that's all I can really say right now, but hopefully soon we'll have a Kickstarter and you can learn more.
The next question is from S. Vito. He asks, how did you feel when you got the contract for writing the book, any of the books that you were ever offered to write, and you knew the ins and outs of the contracted game?
I'm not sure what the question means.
I think it was put. Um,
You mean that I already knew the game really well by the time I got the contract?
Exactly.
That didn't happen that often because usually we got the contract before the game came out, and we had to actually work with alpha and beta copies, and work. Sometimes we got help from the company, sometimes we didn't get much help, and we had to figure it out on our own. The best story of that actually is Quake. When Quake was still in development, id came to Prima and said, we want to contract you guys to write a strategy guide for Quake. And we said, okay, cool. And so I I had a small team on the West Coast, and another guy that I worked with, John Withers, created a team on the East Coast because id wasn't going to give us any help. And so we had to break the game, and we had to do it really, really, really fast. I think 2 weeks maybe to finish the book. And so we broke the game with my team and their team, and I took their analysis of it, played through it to test it, and then wrote the strategy guide. We did it. We got it printed. We got it to them on the deadline or by the deadline that they had asked for, and they never used it. They got a pile of books sent to their offices, and then they never used it. But
that's funny.
But that was typical. I mean, that wasn't totally typical, but we did have to figure out the game on our own quite often, and usually it was before it was released.
This one's a really good question. Stalt asks, you mentioned that book writers are not in high demand anymore. What do you think of the state of internet media? He says, I kind of sometimes feel like it is watered down and weak compared to the coverage we used to get.
Well, I think you can find information, but I don't want to disparage anybody. I think there are some good sites out there, but there are a lot of people who don't understand journalism. There are a lot of people, and there always were, but now more so, people who just want to make a name by being contrarian. The substance of what they say generally isn't as important as their attitude. I never was like that, and I don't necessarily like it. I was a very honest reviewer. The way I review games was usually to say something like, this is what I see in this game. This is what I see is good. This is what I see may be flawed. But if you're the kind of person who likes this kind of game, you may really like it. If you're the kind of person who doesn't like this kind of game, it probably isn't for you. And that was true of many genres. So I wasn't mean. I very rarely wrote a purely negative review, and it was only if the product was A, from a big company, and B, it stank, because then they deserved it.
Awesome.
And I guess there's more to that question. I think that the internet, obviously opens the door for every kind of person to do it. It doesn't take a big bar of entry. I think you can find some great coverage. I think they're really smart people. What I don't like is the outrage machine, the misogyny, the bigotry, the attacks on people. I think that's completely unwarranted, and it bothers me tremendously. I really would like us to keep it civil and recognize that we're all game players. We're all fans, whether we're female or male or whatever we are. We are entitled to an opinion, and we are entitled to respect for that opinion, even if you don't agree with it. That's about all.
Let's take a look here. Do we have any more questions? We still got about 20 minutes, give or take, before our time limit here. But if you have more questions, go ahead and chime in.
What are you interested in most? I mean, are you interested in what it's like to be a writer in the industry, or what the industry is like. I mean, I've watched it grow from very, very early, and I've been able to be friends with a lot of the really pioneers of the industry. I see a question now. When did I actually stop writing? I haven't.
I was gonna say, wasn't your new this month, like over the past month?
It was a few days. It was like a week ago or two.
Yeah, I was gonna say, not
Yeah.
even.
but there is a question that is accurate here. I spent 3 years as a career advisor at the Art Institute in Seattle. It's 3 years that I learned some good things. I helped some people at a very hard time, because it's when the industry or when, you know, the economy failed and it was very difficult. But I wish I hadn't, to be honest, because it was not a very good experience for me. But during that time, 2.5, 3 years, whatever it was, I wasn't writing and I wasn't working in the industry. I was trying to help people get jobs, which I don't regret that part. But there were things about the Institute itself that I wasn't happy about. And there were some good people, but there was some stuff I wasn't happy about. So anyway, yeah, I was kind of out of it for a little while. And then I started up again. And I've been a little slow. My health has been off and on. And so where it used to take me a month or a year, or, you know, whatever it was, it's taken me several years. With High Score Expanded, I had to recreate the layout, a very complex layout from scratch, because the original publisher lost the layout files. That was difficult. And I did it in a new program. I used to use Quark Express, and I was using InDesign, and I had to learn how to use that as well. So it took a long time, and then I had to do research, and I had to find people, and I had to interview, and I had to transcribe interviews. All of it, you know, was just a lot of work, and I was slower than I ever have been. And I think that's what you'll see, is that I'm not as fast as I used to be. But I'm still working, and I'm still writing. And I do a hell of a lot of writing on Facebook. Right now, a lot of it's political, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. Stalt does ask, he says, does it trip you out at all to see just how far games have come visually? It's gone from a couple of pixels to near photorealism and stuff.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we've been looking at this evolution for a long, long time, and everybody is envisioning it. I've been, you know, having my fantasies about what the visuals of games could become. We're not even quite yet to the point where I'd like to get, but it is quite astounding and beautiful. The only caveat I would put on that is, in some cases, looking good replaces being good. There are games that are really, really beautiful and really beautifully designed, but there are other games that seem to rely more on their window dressing than they do on real good game design. And for me, an 8-bit game on the Atari 2600 could have been a great game based on its gameplay, based on its design. And some games with the greatest graphics in the world kind of suck to me. So I think of game design differently than some people, because I don't think it's what it looks like that's the most important thing, even though it's a wonderful thing when everything comes together.
That's awesome. I have a question then. In the same case of the gentleman right before you, Chris Puchek, with Symbio VR, what do you think about the growing virtual reality industry?
I'm a little bit on the fence about it still. I have yet to see something where you cut yourself off from the real world succeed in the long term in games. But virtual reality today and augmented reality are doing some amazing things. We're working with Oculus for Starfighter Inc. To do a virtual reality version of that. I'm also working on a secret project for virtual reality that I can't talk about, but I'm kind of excited about. So, you know, I don't know if it's going to succeed long term, but I do think that it's always intrigued me since I first saw Jared Lanier showing virtual reality. If you've never seen Jared Lanier, he's a big, tall guy with long, super red hair, all in dreadlocks, or he was back in those days. And he was one of the pioneers of virtual reality. And I've experienced different versions of it over the time. So I don't know. I'm on the fence. I hope it, I sort of hope it goes well. And I hope also don't really like the idea of sitting in a room with a goggles on and being completely unaware of the rest of it. I didn't enjoy that when I did it that much. There's something about it that isn't that appealing to me overall. I practice Tai Chi very avidly. I'm a disciple of one of the great grandmasters in the world. And for me, awareness of where I am in the world is pretty important. So perhaps that's part of my prejudice about it.
Right. I'm going to amend Zarok's question. What was the one game-related book that you didn't write that you most enjoyed reading?
Probably Ready Player One.
Oh, man, I love that one. It's my favorite for sure.
I mean, there aren't a lot of game-oriented ones. I will say that I grew up on Tolkien. My mother read me The Hobbit when I was very, very young, and then I read The Lord of the Rings on my own when I was about 15, and I read it several times after that. I'm also a fan of the Game of Thrones series. But, I've read a lot of books. So those ones were some of my, I think, favorites. I think Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land had a big effect on me way back when it was written. I was a big fan of Heinlein in those days, in the 50s or whenever, maybe early 60s. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I do love books, and I'm reading a lot of Terry Pratchett these days because I need humor.
Oh, I love Good Omens. I definitely.
Yeah.
And Mad Unicorn asks a very deep question. This is a good one. With your current pursuits being based in politics, how do you think politics influence the creativity of games today in the AA and AAA range now, especially with the current social environment we have today?
I don't know. I don't know how current politics are affecting games in the AAA world, because the AAA world is so much focused on profit. I mean, it's an enterprise, and Electronic Arts isn't political. They want to stay out of that, I think. In the indie world, of course, there's political games of all kinds, have been for a while. Not that most of them are all that popular. I compartmentalize. I change. I can be different people. While I'm in this group, I'm a game guy. When I'm on Facebook, I'm sometimes trying to promote my book, but because I'm really concerned about our politics, I'm very involved in that. When I'm teaching Tai Chi, I'm very much a Tai Chi guy and not a political guy. When I was a musician, I was a musician. I can be all of those things, and at the same time focus on who I am in the moment. One of my brief encounters with a teacher was Robert Fritz, and he came up with an idea called vehicles. And he said, we all have these personality vehicles that we can put on and take off. And if you think about it, like the way you talk to your best friend, the way you talk to a policeman when they pull you over, the way you talk to your mother, these are all vehicles. The way you talk when you get in front of a big crowd. When I stand up in front of a crowd of 1,000 people and I speak, I put on a vehicle of confidence and affability and competence that is not necessarily how I walk around in the world. So I think that we all have that, and that's why I can be in a political mind on one level and a game one on another. But one of the fallouts of my life changing is and not being a journalist all the time anymore, is I don't follow all the trends anymore, and I am aware of it because I have so many friends in the game industry that anything major doesn't get by me, but I don't follow it as avidly, and I'm not as aware of everything that's going on. So in answer to your question, Mad Unicorn, I don't know 100% how our politics is affecting games. I do know that it affected games in the sense that all the attempts at censorship and attempts to tie it to violence did affect us a great deal. And I wrote a very well-researched chapter in my book Reset about the issue of violence in games and whether or not it was actually a real issue. And for your, just to cut to the chase, I concluded it was not. But at least not in terms of causing people to become violent.
Okay, this one's just specific game related from Stolt. Terry Pratchett was a wonderful author. Did you play the 1995 adventure game Discworld that was roughly based on Pratchett's book, Guards?
I do not believe I ever did. I don't remember playing it, and I wasn't reading Pratchett then, or I probably would have been all over it. Maybe I'll try to find it and see if I can still play it in retro.
That actually also makes me think of Starship Titanic from Douglas Adams. Did you ever play that one?
I didn't. No.
Didn't.
Probably should have.
I'm sure it's out there somewhere to be able to find. It was fun. It was a good little puzzle game.
1995 of all times was when things were winding down at Prima and I was about to transition out of the company. It was pretty tumultuous for me. And after I left Prima, I almost immediately started designing a game that was based in the French Resistance, which I did get funding money for. I did proof of concept for, got accepted and greenlit, and then the parent company dropped it, dropped the whole company, not us, but the whole company, Mindscape, lost all of its funding. So that was a time when I wasn't so much playing other people's games as designing games, and I spent about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years mostly focused on designing original games.
Zarok added, could you link to your Twitter if you want to, of course?
I suck at Twitter. I got into it when it started and I just got overwhelmed, too much going on and I couldn't keep up. And so I have not kept up my Twitter account. It does exist. It's DeMaria99, but it's pretty, I should get back to it, but I haven't. And like I say, I'm getting old. I can only do a few things at once, it seems like. But it's there. It's there. If you want to post me a tweet, I could probably answer it and get involved.
All right. Do we have any last questions from everyone? We're coming down to the grind here for Rusel DeMaria. Is there any more questions?
Well, hope I've satisfied you with some interesting answers, and thank you for being part of it. And
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming, attending, speaking. It's an honor. It's a pleasure. We hope to see you again on the next time if we end up doing another one of these.
Sure. Let me know. Let me know. And have a great conference.
All right. Thank you so much. And have a great day, sir.
Thank you. All to you.